This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on global macroeconomic issues and other key aspects of G20 Finance track. The participants are Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, and Gaura Dhawan Lal, AIR correspondent.
Mr. Ashok Sajjanhar, first meeting of the finance track of the G20 began yesterday in Bengaluru and is on till the 15th of December, where the first level, in fact, the central bank deputies across the G20 nations and the senior-most finance ministry bureaucrats are meeting to discuss global economic policy coordination and other issues. Now, this is going to form the basis of which goes up to as the seniority level of the people interacting is raised and basic policy issues are going to be raised. We also know that a range of issues are going to come up, from sustainable development goals to understanding the debt which has been raised post-pandemic across countries, what's happening with the Russia-Ukraine war and its impact on other countries, from nurturing a green economy and the money we are putting into it. So what do you think are some areas which are of global concern, particularly to all the G20 nations, which will take center stage?
Before I respond to the very important question that you have posed, what I'd like to say is that India has really hit the ground running as it has taken on the G20 presidency, because even before it had assumed, it had taken over the mantle of the presidency. In the last days of November itself, we had a meeting of the ambassadors of G20 countries and the other invitees. We had meeting of all those ambassadors invited at the Swaraj Dweep in Andaman Nicobar Islands. And then earlier this month, we also had the first Sherpa meeting for 3 days at Udaipur. So all these meetings, I think there is a momentum that is being built up. And now we see that we have the first finance track meeting at the level of central bank deputies and senior members of the finance ministries. As you said very correctly, I think the biggest challenges that confront the world today, and amongst them may be the existential threat of the climate change in terms of financing activities of countries to deal with the scourge of climate change. Particularly, I would think in terms of providing finance at concessional rates, providing technologies to developing countries to deal both with the mitigation as well as the adaptation aspects of climate change. I think that is definitely going to be an issue that is going to be discussed very seriously. I think secondly, also we would have the issue of the Sustainable Development Goals, because we have seen these two totally unexpected shocks as far as the global economy is concerned. First, the COVID-19 pandemic, and then after that, Russia-Ukraine conflict. So I think the fallout of these two big shocks to the global economy, to the global financial architecture, I think they will also definitely come up for very detailed consideration and discussion.
The Prime Minister had actually asked earlier in one of his addresses for reform of institutions like the UN, the IMF and the World Bank. What are some of the reforms that are critical and need to be fast-paced?
What we have seen is over the last several years, that the United Nations has not been able to meet the challenges that confront the world in a very effective or credible manner. And, if we speak about the pandemic, then the manner in which the WHO conducted itself, after about 3 years, we still do not know what is the origin of the pandemic, how did the virus come about, because I think it is less to do with apportioning blame to any country, but more to protect ourselves going forward, that we don't suffer similar fate going forward with more pandemics and more medicine-resistant viruses coming amidst us, and how should we be better prepared. And as Prime Minister Modi has mentioned, we have one earth and one health. That is the motto that we have to move forward with, because if there is such a disease or an ailment which is so very infectious in one part of the world, then we cannot stay in the false hope that it is not going to reach other parts of the world. I think it's only India which has risen up to the occasion. supplying the same medicine to a large number of other developing countries in our neighborhood and much further. So today we see that we have distributed more than 200 million vaccine doses to more than 100 countries. So it is WHO, it is also the UN Security Council, which has failed as far as dealing with the Russia-Ukraine conflict is concerned, and it is the responsibility of the Security Council to ensure that there is peace and security in the world. And this is primarily because the United Nations is working still on the same architecture that evolved in 1945 after the Second World War. While the situation today is very, very different from what prevailed at that time. At that time, there were just 53 countries which were members of the United Nations. Today, there are 193 countries. And of course, in terms of the political, economic strength, influence, power, clout, there are many other countries, and India is the first contender to be a permanent member of the UN Security Council, but that has not happened. So there are so many agencies and bodies of the United Nations which are crying for reform. And we do sincerely hope that in the G20 there will be discussions on that.
Right. And the rate of pace of change is so fast now. I think we really need to be ready about financing cities of tomorrow. And I think one of them we spoke of, one family, one future, as has been Prime Minister Modi's call out to the nations. Inclusivity is something that we are looking at, even if it is coming towards the sustainable development goals, because no one country can do it in isolation. It's a collaboration, that effort. Talking about in this area, managing global debt vulnerabilities, because with the economic crisis looming large and a lot of countries already struggling not to go under, how do you think this can be taken forward to make it more of a level playing field?
I think you have woven all the aspects very well together. You spoke about the one earth, one family, one future. That is the theme, that is the motto that India has adopted from our age-old ethos of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family.
Right.
And in that sense, inclusivity is absolutely essential. And we find that although this war is taking place, it's not only the war that issues have happened. The issues have taken place in terms of the debt vulnerabilities. Even before that, we saw that even with the Belt and Road Initiative, there are so many countries that are facing the debt trap, even in our own neighborhood. And after that, with the pandemic also, because there were such huge lockdowns, such extended lockdowns, that the economic performance of a large number of countries that suffered, joblessness increased, productivity came down, debt of individuals, companies that increased. And of course, that has been further exacerbated by the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Absolutely.
Because we see that there are so many shortages that have come about in the world, whether it is food, whether it is energy, whether it is fertilizers, and there is such huge inflation that has occurred because of all the sanctions that have been placed. And it is not only that developing countries are suffering. Of course, the advanced countries are also suffering, but when you look at the per capita income of advanced countries in the range of $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 per annum. And in Africa, you have people who are surviving on a per capita of $1,000 or a few $1,000s. Then, of course, the impact on them is much greater. So that is why India has also mentioned that it will be voice of the global south. And it has invited most of the guest countries, it has invited for all these deliberations and the summit next year. They are from the global south because I think their voices and their needs, demands, requirements, ambitions and aspirations also need to be taken cognizance of and built squarely in any decisions that the G20 member countries arrive at.
Absolutely. And I think it's a very valid point that visibility and advocacy of issues, countries in fora which are more pan-nation, which are international, needs to be a little more assertive. And I think India would be playing that role because it is in a position to do so and has decided that it somewhere fits in with its ethos and values with which it has always been wanting to govern.
I think this is a theme that both the Prime Minister as well as the External Affairs Minister have been speaking about. If you recall, when the Prime Minister had gone for his first address to the UN General Assembly in 2014 September, then also he had invoked the ethos of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam.
Yes.
And when External Affairs Minister had gone to the United Nations General Assembly in September this year, he met more than 50-60 foreign ministers, most of them from developing countries, and they had this huge angst that they were affected much more than other countries.
And not being heard.
They are being denied the right, and that is why decision was taken that we will invite these many countries from the developing world. They also have their voice, and I think in that context you had mentioned about inclusivity, and this is very important. And I think at every step, whether it was at the Sherpa meeting, whether it is in the finance track, I think across the board, India will definitely encourage and involve the voices of these countries so that whatever outcomes we are able to get out of G20, they are credible and they are able to make a real impact as far as dealing with these challenges are concerned.
Right. Mr. Sajanhar, wanting to now draw your attention to the digitization, the challenges from the digitization of the economy. We're looking at that, regulation of digital assets, and now, like some of the other countries, we brought in a digital rupee, of course, somewhere to counter the effect of cryptocurrency and make it more regular, the crypto market. Where do you think this can lead in terms of decisions in the higher level? Can we bring in some universalization? Can we bring in more regulation? Because these are areas where large gaps could possibly arise, and the scale is huge on which they are adopted then.
No, absolutely. If I could put it this way, one is the issue of digitization. And there, I think India has registered huge successes because during the pandemic and after that, I think reaching out to people, sending out support, sending out subsidies through their bank accounts, through the financial inclusion that we have been able to do, I think that can really serve as a role model as far as the world is concerned. And I think the Prime Minister in many of his statements has also said that more than 40% of all financial transactions being done in the world are being done in India. So I think India has really moved forward by leaps and bounds as far as digitization is concerned. The other aspect, of course, is cryptocurrencies and the digital assets. And I think this is an area where there is not much work, there is not much experience, and so all the countries really need to come together, put their heads together to see what is the best way that they can move forward so that we are able to deal with the challenges. There are the unscrupulous elements in the financial world and in the society are not able to misuse these facilities, because we have seen in the past that whether it is money laundering or support to terrorism, many times the cryptocurrencies and digital assets are the ones that are used for that purpose. So how to make sure that they are not misused, but still they are employed to the best advantage. This is what I would say is the still unknown, uncharted territory, which all the countries, those who have done work on it, those who have had experience in this, they really need to come together, and all the financial experts, those who are meeting in this meeting, the finance ministers and the governors are going to be meeting in February in Bengaluru. So they will also take this up, and I do sincerely hope that we will be able to get greater clarity on how to move forward on these aspects.
Absolutely. I think peer learning and learning from each other's experiences is the way to go forward, and that's collaboration. Thank you so much, Mr. Ashok Sajanhar. We learned from you today. You shared your views and expert comments. It was a pleasure interacting with you.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on global macroeconomic issues and other key aspects of G20 Finance track. The participants were Ashok Sajanhar, former diplomat, and Gaurav Dhawanlal, AIR correspondent. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsttalks@gmail.com.